Futurist Jim Carroll from the virtual broadcast studio. We're still hanging out in my basement working with all this technology, talking about the future, talking about trends, talking about what comes next. But some really fascinating things are starting to happen. It's becoming pretty clear that one day I'm going to have to abandon this virtual studio because I'm going to find myself on a real stage. So I'm going to go back to the type of stage I'm going to find myself on. Looking really interesting for November. I've got a keynote happening overseas in Europe, and in the week before, I'm going to be in Orlando, I'm going to be in Philly, and I'm going to be in Detroit talking about the future trends. I don't know if I have my stage style still with me, but here's what's fascinating is people are starting to return to the future, and I'm talking a lot about, for example, manufacturing. Before the pandemic hit, I found myself in Marrakesh, Morocco for the World Bank with a talk about the future of manufacturing in third world countries. And we had a lot of global leaders in there to talk about the opportunity. Obviously, a lot has changed, and yet a lot stays the same. And here's what I'm discovering. A formula that people are really getting into when it comes to future insight is the type of keynote that clients are booking into. And that is where I'm covering off what were we talking about before the pandemic? What were the trends within an industry, whether that's retail, whether that's manufacturing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's insurance? What were we talking about pre-pandemic? And then how has the global pandemic shifted the access of our universe? And the third pillar to this type of talk is, what are we going to do about it? What were we talking about before? What has changed? And what's our plan? I'm finding that folks are getting really excited about this type of formula. And here's the thing. I was still covering this type of insight down here in the virtual broadcast studio. Throughout the pandemic, I was forcing myself to go live every couple of days in order to remain fresh with content, keep up to date with trends, and keep a critical eye on what was unfolding in industries. But eventually I'm going to find myself returning to the stage. I'm still going to have a virtual broadcast studio because it will play a really important role in the insight I share with my clients. Here's what I want to talk about right now. What is happening with the world of manufacturing? How has it changed? What can we expect going forward? And this is based upon a recent project with a client in which I covered those three pillars. What were we talking about with manufacturing before the pandemic? How has COVID shifted the reality of manufacturing? And what can we expect going forward? What new issues are arriving? So let me walk you through these three pillars. Number one, clearly what happened with the pandemic was that pre-pandemic, we were dealing in the world of manufacturing with the rapid acceleration of new methodologies. We were dealing with a situation in which manufacturing companies were discovering all kinds of new ways to accelerate what they could do. And this involved a lot of new methodologies, a lot of new ways of working, a lot of sophisticated technologies. This was a clear trend pre-2020. I was talking a lot about additive manufacturing, 3D printing. This is a trend that was coming along at staggering speed before the pandemic. The industrial Internet of Things in the factory was a key issue. How do we embed sensors throughout our manufacturing process? How do we embed sensors throughout every single aspect of what we are doing as a tool to give us better insight into the manufacturing process, better insight into how to manage our manufacturing, particularly as the world of manufacturing was becoming much more complex, much more sophisticated. We were talking a lot about a world of rapid product prototyping, iterative design, iterative manufacturing process. The old world of manufacturing, say the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, we would design a product, we would put it out to market, and we would hope it would sell. Well, the impact of what we've seen in the last several years is that we can design a product, we can test it in the marketplace, we can redesign it, we can test it again. We go through this iterative process where the design is never really finalized because we put so much agility and flexibility into our manufacturing process that we can keep adapting it and changing it. This was a trend we were talking about before. An obvious trend pre-2020 was the impact of crowdfunding, crowdsourcing on design, where initiatives like Kickstarter and Indigo and things like that would lead to this interactive world with our customers that would truly shape what it was we were designing and bringing to the market. Obviously, disruption was a big concern in the manufacturing world with the rapid emergence of new competitors. This was all part of the acceleration of manufacturing and the fact that part of what was happening was for organizations and individuals that had their creativity engines running on retrofire, they could imagine a new world where they could disrupt existing markets. All of this was leading to a situation in which organizations in the manufacturing sector were finding themselves short on skills. Look, I was with one robotics manufacturer, and they indicated that there was no shortage of job opportunities throughout North America in the manufacturing sector. The problem was skilled talent. They observed it's almost as if the typical machinist today has to be able to do trigonometry in their heads in order to deal with the reality of what is occurring out there. I spent a lot of time talking about the rapid emergence of new materials. Could we construct a jet airplane that is almost invisible, like Wonder Woman's jet? There's actually a video clip on my site where I was challenging people to think about fast material science and what we could do. And a lot of organizations are dealing with lightning of products, particularly in the transportation sector. How do we make our vehicles less heavy through accelerated scientific advancement of materials? This was a huge focus pre-2020. Obviously, we were talking a lot about how do we embed intelligence into our products? How do we make them connected? How do we develop a hyper-connected product? And obviously Amazon. Amazon is changing everything throughout every single supply chain. And how do we manage Amazon? The fact it's completely challenging and changing our distribution process. As Amazon comes to dominate the world of retail, it has massive disruptive impacts on every single aspect of the manufacturing process. Well, these are the trends I was talking about pre-pandemic. This is the type of thing where the World Bank brought me over to Morocco to talk to the Global Manufacturing Conference as to how manufacturing will change going forward. And then the pandemic hit and our entire world changed. The phrase I'm using is that the global pandemic has shifted the axis of our universe, and it certainly shifted the axis of my universe where, like many people, I got to hang out in my basement for a long time and built this virtual broadcast studio with a whole bunch of gear. Here's the thing, throughout this process, I kept busy developing insight, putting content out there, researching trends, understanding what was I talking about before and how is that changing as a result of the pandemic. And what I'm now realizing is organizations are clamoring for this type of insight. I perceive an extremely busy future because as we come out the other side of this thing, people want to know, well, what comes next? What are we going to do about it? Well, here's for an example of what I've seen happen in the world of manufacturing. Pre-pandemic, we had a world of just-in-time inventory, and I think we realized supply chains were broken. Companies were scrambling to get parts and supplies wherever they could. So the way I phrase it is we shifted from a world of just-in-time inventory to just-in-time, just-in-case inventory. We saw obviously a lot of supply chain volatility because supply chains were broken, and with that we saw a lot of price inflation. Organizations saw that the cost of a lot of the inputs, raw materials, component parts were subjected to rapidly increasing prices because when everything is broken, competition drives up price. One of the most fascinating things about the pandemic is we actually saw the rapid adoption of new methodologies, and 3D printing is the perfect example. A lot of organizations were talking about 3D printing before the pandemic, and all of a sudden we were actually using that technology to print swabs and to print masks and to print all kinds of medical devices that could be used through the technology, through the pandemic. And I think what this did is it caused a lot of CEOs and senior leaders to sit back and go, wow, this stuff that we were talking about, which seemed like science fiction, is very real. So it accelerated the rapid adoption of these methodologies. Robotics took off in a big way, and that's because what we had to do was we had to put in place a lot of distancing protocol in our factories, and organizations realized one way to deal with distancing was to accelerate their adoption of robotic technology. And these robots were, to coin a phrase, emerging from the cage. Robots previously had to be inside a metal cage in order that they'd be shielded from working hand in hand with humans. But as robotics became more sophisticated, they could emerge from the cage and work side by side. We saw the acceleration of a lot of production visibility initiatives. We needed better insight into our production process. And so we saw a lot of organizations adopting technologies that they were just talking about pre-pandemic. We've got to put in place this sophisticated insight methodology to truly understand what we were doing. Organizations were dealing with a lot of sudden new demand volatility. Think about what you were going through when you were trying to buy some exercise equipment or a bicycle, fitness equipment. I mean, we were in a situation in which you simply couldn't get particular products because everybody wanted them. And so organizations were suddenly dealing in particular sectors with sudden new demand volatility. Everybody was wrestling with a greater focus on cost management because of the rapid acceleration of cost. To get things done, and for example, to align to this new world of shipping directly to consumers or the dominance of Amazon in everything we do, manufacturing companies had to put in place faster partnerships. Think of, pick and pack and direct-to-consumer shipping and e-commerce and all of this stuff. They had to find partners who could help them develop their capabilities quicker. While all of this was going on with the pandemic, clearly what we also saw was the faster acceleration of other trends, a focus on electric cars, batteries, autonomous technologies, renewables. A lot of the stuff we were talking about pre-pandemic suddenly took on greater velocity with the pandemic. And now the big question a lot of organizations in the manufacturing sector and every industry are asking themselves, well, what is the impact of all of this stuff? And I spent a lot of time in the last year and a half down here in the virtual studio thinking exactly about that, doing a lot of research, understanding what it is that is driving forward industries, and shared a lot of that from the virtual broadcast studio here with all this gear. Here's what I think is happening in the world of manufacturing. I think we are going to see going forward a major trend with what I call the Chief Resilience Officer. Organizations have realized that there was a lot of risk in their supply chain. A lot of things that broke down, and this was accelerated by such issues as that ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal. Organizations realized they needed to spend a lot more time to build a lot more resilience into their entire manufacturing process. So I think we're going to see the emergence of the Chief Resilience Officer. Obviously, globalization broke down, and it's continuing to break down. There's a lot of new globalization stress that is out there that existed before the pandemic, but has been exacerbated by what has occurred in the last 14 to 16 months. I think what we are going to witness is more organizations talking about how do we bring some of our production back? How do we nearshore? How do we, begin to abandon some of our offshore manufacturing? This won't happen all at once, and actually might not happen in a large way for a lot of industries. But deglobalization is a strategy that a lot of organizations are thinking about. The challenge is the organizations don't have the skills to do this on a cost-effective basis. Organizations clearly are going to focus going forward in the future into building redundancy into their supply chains, building in a lot more agility, a lot more flexibility. And again, this was exacerbated by the Suez Canal ship, where organizations realized their entire supply chain could go into the sink because a particular ship got stuck. So they're going to focus on redundancy and agility. I think a big focus for a lot of organizations going forward is we learned a lot throughout the pandemic. We learned a lot about how to collaborate differently. We learned a lot about how to partner with other organizations differently. We learned a lot about how to move fast, think fast, act fast. We eliminated indecision. And I think that a lot of organizations, leaders are now, how do we ensure we don't go back to the organizational sclerosis that we had before the pandemic, which was slowing us down? We learned how to operate quickly. We like it. It's effective. We got to keep this. The manufacturing sector, I think we are going to continue to see, because of distancing and protocols and safety and things like this, we're going to continue to see an acceleration in robotic technology. We're going to see a lot of very unique issues with workforce decisions. What are manufacturing facilities going to do with the unvaccinated? What are manufacturing facilities going to do in terms of vaccine hesitancy? What are large organizations going to do in terms of the decisions they will make about economic development relocation? Are we going to choose to locate a sophisticated new manufacturing facility in a region that has low vaccine rates, putting ourselves at additional risk and additional cost simply because we have a sector of the population who chooses not to participate in science? I think this is going to be an absolutely massive trend going forward. And I think political leaders need to recognize that some of the decisions they're making in some of these locations are going to have a pretty profound negative impact on their economic potential going forward. It's also going to benefit certain regions and certain countries in ways that we are only beginning to comprehend. I'm based outside of Toronto, Canada. We are now #1 in the world in terms of vaccine uptake. And I think what this does is this really positions Canada in an extremely beneficial way for future economic relocation development decisions. Number 7, a need for better supply chain insight. If we're deglobalizing, if we're focusing on resiliency, if we're building in redundancy, we've got to have continued better insight into every single aspect of our supply chain. Manufacturing is going to have to accelerate their direct-to-consumer strategies. People have shopped online, they like it, they are going to increasingly purchase direct from manufacturing organizations. So this is going to be a big part of the trend that we're dealing with going forward. Re-examination of logistics. With that direct-to-consumer activity comes a need for all kinds of different shipping strategies and dealing with logistics and getting it to the consumer directly. You might not have noticed, but many of the world's largest airlines have taken their old, inefficient, non-cost-effective jets, gas guzzlers, 767s, and are converting them to freighters, because what we are witnessing is really a renaissance in air freighter traffic. This is going to be an absolutely massive issue going forward. And there's going to be a new emphasis on security, ransom attacks. This really has nothing to do with the pandemic, but maybe it does, because a lot of people sitting at home realizing they could attack a corporate network and they could cause havoc with all the free time that they have. This is an example of the type of trends that I've been covering in terms of one particular industry. What were we dealing with in an industry before the pandemic? How has the pandemic shifted the trajectory of that industry? And third, what new trends exist going forward? But not only that, how have the previous trends that we were talking about before changed as a result of what comes next? I'm ready to go. I'm seeing a lot of inquiries. I'm seeing a lot of bookings. I'm seeing a lot of interest from organizations who are eager to align themselves to a new and different future. So I'm going to be obviously emerging and going back out to my stage, but continuing to share insight from my virtual broadcast studio. And that was a little bit of an oops, but I guess that's a wrap. Have a good one, Futurist Jim Carroll.